During the third generation, the Hunters Guild focused broadly on charting new lands that had so far proven impenetrable. The islands around Moga were only one such frontier, albeit the most fruitful one. But another such location was a desert region that the archaeological communities within the guild had long since expressed an interest in. The Sandy Plains, where dunes cover ruins of a long-destroyed settlement. Compared to the dune deserts of Dede or the vast Sekumea Desert, it has a more varied landscape where oases jut out from the harsh, sun-baked ground, and where numerous caves offer respite to weary inhabitants. Once an expedition into the region had been greenlit, scholars rushed into the sizzling heat to analyze those most tantalizing ruins. However, the expedition teams quickly ran into an issue. Every research project needs a base of operations, and in deserts, it is common wisdom to try and establish such a base either near a shaded rock or an oasis. But every time teams approached the nearest oasis to see if it was suitable, a large, unknown wyvern would explode from the wet soil, roaring and whistling in anger, chasing the researchers away immediately. While this slowed down progress on the archaeological survey, this guardian of the oasis was nonetheless a worthwhile new discovery. This was, in no small part, due to its odd body structure. Through the sand clouds and mud blobs, scholars spied the shape of a creature that broadly resembled a runner wyvern, with a bipedal stance, strong hind legs, long tail, and decently developed arms instead of front legs. But this creature was larger and bulkier than any runner wyvern known to the guild. It was also much more aggressive, and seemed to stand much higher in the food chain. It was, on one occasion, even witnessed chasing off a Diablos. The more observations of this creature occurred, the less it seemed like a runner wyvern. From hip structure to muscle mass, it simply didn't seem to fit into that infraorder of bird wyvern. In the end, the guild decided to, again, revise its phylogenetic tree, adding an entirely new suborder to the wyvern hip order. Brute leg, wyvern defined by powerful bodies, bipedal movement, and extremely well-developed hind legs. Creatures belonging to this suborder are called brute wyvern, and its first member was to be this oasis troublemaker, named Barroth by the guild. Covered in thick armor shelling, adorned with an enormous head structure, and walking on two powerful hind legs, the Barroth strikes an imposing figure. Despite how heavy they are, they can run and charge surprisingly fast, thanks to their muscular legs. Their forearms, meanwhile, are held in front of the body, and are developed well enough to dig through soil with their long, tough claws. Barroth come in two known color morphs, dull brown and vivid orange. What exactly determines which coloration is expressed per individual is currently unknown, but it is worth noting that the orange morph only seems to emerge in the Old World. But neither of its colorations is as striking as the bizarre structure on top of the Barroth's head. 5 massive armored tubes run from its mouth all the way to the top, forming a tall, flat-top structure the guild calls a Barroth crown. This crown is actually a modified nose, and each of the armored tubes has a nostril on its top end. This enormous and heavy crown is extremely resistant to damage, and is also crucial to much of the Barroth's ecology. It is also a useful indicator by which the guild can identify and study individual Barroths. Males have larger crowns than females, besides also just being bulkier in general. Juvenile Barroth, meanwhile, look almost identical to adults, but have entirely undeveloped, tiny crowns. The Barroth crown also grows continuously throughout the wyvern's life, and can be used to roughly determine the age of the Barroth that wears it. Barroth live exclusively in desert zones, both in the Old and New World. While it was originally discovered in the Sandy Plains, it has since been sighted in both the Dune and Sekumea deserts, as well as the Wildspire Waste. Additionally, there have been reports of a possible Moga Island population that only comes out at night, but research into this matter is still ongoing. Being a desert dweller, one might expect the Barroth to be supremely heat resistant. But curiously, the opposite is the case. For reasons that are currently unclear, Barroth have an extremely high body temperature and are thus very prone to overheating. So while their range is limited to deserts, their actual habitat type is specifically desert oases and swamps, areas where a water source turns the baking sand into a cool, muddy sludge. A Barroth will choose such a spot as the center of its vast territory, and must frequently return to it to cool off after venturing into the hot desert. During the day's hottest hours, the Barroth usually lays submerged in its cool mud, with the top of its crown poking out. The nostrils on top allow it to breathe even when the entire rest of the body is under the surface, likely the reason the nose developed into such a unique shape in the first place. As the sun's broiling assault eases off, the Barroth rises from its muck, ready for its daily routine. Before it can venture out, however, it must perform its most famous behavior. The large wyvern will roll around in the mud like a pup, rubbing and shaking its body until its entire shell is covered in a thick, muddy coat. This coating serves multiple purposes. It's mainly a way to stay cool, as the mud prevents heat from penetrating into the Barroth's body and prolongs the time the wyvern can spend away from its home base. Additionally, the slimy shield protects the shell and skin from parasites and unwanted critters. And in the long term, while most of the mud will fall off as the creature moves, a small portion of it will, baked by the sun, adhere to the shell essentially permanently, fusing onto it and reinforcing the Barroth's defenses. Once the mud coat has been properly applied, the Barroth heads out. Its primary goal on any day is that of every organism: food. Despite its large frame and fierce appearance, the Barroth is not a predator. Rather, this brute wyvern is a pure insectivore, feeding on all sorts of critters that it finds in the mud and sand. Its primary food sources are Alteroth mounds. Alteroth are large, highly nutritious neopterons that spend their days collecting nutrients from mushrooms and beehives, and transporting them back to their nest using an expandable bubble sac on their rear ends. They congregate in tall mounds, which the Barroth can crush open with its massive crown to feast on the delicious bugs. Aside from eating, the Barroth uses its time away from the mud to patrol its territory. While Old World Barroth vary their patrol routes quite frequently, New World Barroth have been noted to have very distinct travel patterns that they only rarely deviate from. A single Barroth can claim vast swaths of deserts for itself, and will guard it with intense jealousy. It is an incredibly aggressive species that tolerates no intrusions into its home turf, willing to fight off opponents much larger than itself. When a Barroth spots an opponent, it will first attempt to scare it off, roaring loudly while expelling white steam from its nostrils. Should this threat display fail, the Barroth attacks. Its heavy body and thick shell armor allow it to crash into enemies violently without having to worry about the impact. Its primary weapon for such situations is its head crown, which serves as a powerful battle hammer that can pulverize even thick wyvern bones with a direct hit. Its rigid tail can also be used as a whip, and swipes from its hard claws can cause brutal lacerations. The Barroth is not merely a brute, however. In particularly tough battles, it can pull off a fascinating strategy. By shaking its body, the Barroth can launch chunks of its mud coat at its opponent. This reduces its heat resistance, but comes with a great payoff. The mud is thick and sticky, and enemies hit by it will find themselves unable to move effectively. Once its target has been entrapped like that, the Barroth will perform its most devastating move. Lowering its head, it will charge at its enemy with full force, its crown serving as a deadly battering ram. Since it can't see very well from this position, this attack is usually performed in a straight line only, but if it connects, it can reliably end fights immediately. Hunters returning from the field have noted that right as it prepares this charge attack, the Barroth will take a deep breath that produces a recognizable high-pitched whistling sound. A single Barroth can start and overcome multiple fights per day. Males are especially aggressive, and will even fight each other to the death if they ever meet. This intense temper is generally interpreted to be a result of the wyvern's habitat. Desert bogs are not exactly common, so any that do exist must be defended desperately. This desperation is twofold. The bog is the Barroth's lifeline, as without its cooling mud, the creature will surely overheat and perish. But also, the quality and size of a male's territory is crucial in securing females, which will only mate with Barroths that hold impressive bogs as their own. These factors, coupled with the short supply of suitable bogs, informs the Barroth's violent lifestyle. This is, however, also where the guild has noted the most drastic case of regional variation between Old and New World Barroths. The individuals found on the New World continent are much less aggressive, and no fights between males have so far been observed. They also appear to be more tolerant of small to medium-sized intruders, and will only retaliate if provoked sufficiently. A possible explanation for this difference can be found in the New World's geography. The primary desert of this continent, the Wildspire Waste, is almost entirely surrounded by water. In the south and the east, the ocean forms a swampy coast, while in the west, water that was initially collected by the treetops of the ancient forest flows all the way into the waste as streams and rivers. This makes the Wildspire Waste an uncharacteristically humid desert, and desert bogs seem to form here much more frequently than in the Old World. Since there is a greater abundance of their habitat, New World Barroths are less anxious and more relaxed than their Old World counterparts. When it isn't busy fighting or eating, the Barroth does some regular chores around its territory. The wyvern can often be seen rubbing its body against sharp rock walls. It does this to sand off and manage its armor shell and head crown. By selectively scraping material off in some spots while leaving it in others, the Barroth carefully adjusts its center of mass and weight regularly to ensure optimal movement despite the heavy load on its head. It also uses the opportunity to mark its territory with mud piles. While Barroth are usually solitary, this changes in the mating season. Females venture out to inspect the territories and bogs of the males, choosing the ones whose lands are the most impressive. Usually, one male and one female form a pair, but on rare occasions, a male Barroth with an exceptionally impressive territory may be able to convince multiple females to form a small harem. Once the parents have found each other and mated, they use the mud from their bog to build a tall mound, into which the females lay between 10 and 20 eggs. Barroths are cooperative parents, with both males and females protecting the nest and incubating the eggs. In some cases, geothermal heat can also aid in hatching the eggs. Once hatched, the young Barroth spend their time eating any insects they find near and on their birth mound. Once the young become large and heavy, the mound collapses, and they must now venture out to find their own way in life. As far as contact with humans is concerned, the guild classifies the Barroth as a medium threat. While it is undoubtedly ferocious and dangerous if encountered, it does not wander or invade any new areas frequently. As long as one stays away from marked Barroth territories, they are essentially a non-factor in terms of threat. The most common way humans get hurt by Barroth is when traveling merchants choose to ignore established routes in favor of a shortcut, finding themselves face to face with the landslide wyvern. Barroth hunts are nonetheless organized somewhat frequently, due to how valuable many of their materials are. The armor plates on the back of the wyvern are extremely sturdy, as they get the most sun exposure and are thus composed of additionally hardened baked mud layers, excellent to build armors and fortifications with. The claws are also used to reinforce various tools. The mud of a Barroth is also highly sought after. As the creature rolls around in its bog, it mixes and remixes the mud on its body and in its nest constantly, even mixing in bits from insects that it crushes. This makes Barroth mud a top-grade fertilizer, and agricultural organizations are willing to pay high prices for a batch of it. Lastly, Barroth meat is surprisingly tasty, and the tail is considered a delicacy. One must be careful not to perforate the liver, however, as it smells terrible and spoils the adjacent meat rapidly if punctured. Since its discovery, the Barroth has been observed many times, being a staple of various desert environments. But during the early days of its research, the existence of another Barroth species was proposed. In a bizarre report, hunters told of seeing a Barroth in the graveyard tundra, a frozen land blanketed in snow year-round. This seemed unlikely, but the guild investigated nonetheless. To their surprise, the survey team did indeed sight a Barroth in the deep Arctic, a turquoise-colored subspecies of Barroth, later named Jade Barroth. It largely resembles the desert species, being a bipedal wyvern covered in a hard armor shell and adorned with a hammer-like head crown. The main differences are seen in the coloration. Jade Barroth's shell is a brilliant green-blue color, while the underside of the body is yellow. The shell is also covered in a thin layer of ice at all times, giving it an ephemeral surface appearance. Besides that, Jade Barroth also seem to grow larger crowns on average than the desert species. This subspecies is considered extremely rare. It seems to only live in the graveyard tundra, and has so far never been found in any other Arctic hunting ground. It has, in general, only been seen a handful of times, and sightings have even become rarer as time has gone on. From what little has been seen of it, the Jade Barroth seems to share many ecological features with the desert Barroth. It too holds vast territories, although it doesn't seem to centralize them around any single landmark. Guild scholars have noted that more dominant Jade Barroth seem to claim territories further north, so it's possible that the desirable factor of a territory is temperature, and that less powerful Jade Barroths must content themselves with warmer, less desirable lands. Unlike its desert cousin, the Jade Barroth doesn't submerge itself for parts of the day, and is instead constantly on patrol. Since Altoroth don't live in such cold climates, the Jade Barroth instead searches for the nests of Bnahabra, a species of flying Neopteron that builds nests in shallow hills. The Jade Barroth uses its crown to crush those nests and feed on its inhabitants, similar to how the desert species handles Altoroth mounds. While their diets may be similar, there is one behavior that distinguishes the Jade Barroth quite starkly from its relative. As it patrols its home turf, the Jade Barroth periodically lays down into the snow and covers itself in it, much like the desert species does with mud. The Jade Barroth, however, also secretes a fluid from its skin, which mixes with the snow and causes it to harden and freeze. This allows it to construct an incredibly dense layer of ice around its body, and older individuals seem to maintain thicker coats of dermal permafrost armor than younger ones. Scholars have suggested that since the Jade Barroth obviously doesn't need to cool down, this behavior might instead serve purely to enhance its armor and strengthen its defenses. This would make sense, as the Arctic regions of our world are home to some of the most ferocious wyvern known to the Guild, and sharing a habitat with them would naturally come with increased danger. When confronted with such an interloper, the Jade Barroth uses many of the same tricks seen in the desert species: headbutts, claw swipes, tail swings. As it cannot use mud to entrap enemies, the Jade Barroth uses the snow on its body to achieve the same effect, with the added danger of causing frostbite in those who are hit. If the snow on its body is not enough, the Jade Barroth can also use its crown as a snow shovel, lifting large amounts of snow into the air and launching it at targets. It also seems to be more agile than the desert species. Hunters have observed that Jade Barroth are in fact capable of changing directions during their heavy charge attacks. It is unknown how they do this, but it is known to be deadly. But, just like with the Desert Barroth, the actual threat that the Jade Barroth poses to humans is rather slim. In theory, encountering one would almost certainly be a fatal disaster. In practice, however, Jade Barroth are so rare and live in such a remote land that any accidental encounter between it and humans is highly unlikely. The few times that the Jade Barroth was successfully hunted, its materials were found to be of excellent quality, as the ice-covered shell is extremely sturdy. Its meat is also considered a luxury food item due to its rarity, extravagant taste due to exposure to the cold, and the difficulty involved in preparing it correctly. Thank you all so much for watching another one of my videos. I hope you enjoyed it. I want to thank all of my patrons and YouTube channel members who make every video on this channel possible. I would like to especially thank Joshua Ellison, Uthduna is an octopus, Chocolate Coat, Hunter Spaniol, Precum King, Joey Triby 58, Makamawi, Uriv, Michael Monroe, Johnny, CJ, Carl the Crab, Christopher Bronson, Harpier, Suddenly, Suck Uwu Bus 69, Molly Mockery, Rose, Zyperius Folkvar, Hamburger Discord, Zaffy, Theopuz, Lufish, Morgleblank, Tactywolf, Phyla Zero, Jacob Coleman, Hellbug Hunter, Shebo, M1Have12, Regal Eagle, Wronger97, Quali, Matt Hat 124, My Name Gone, The Dollarfish, Sheba, Ryan Hook, Viraxis, Thick, Kuroneko, Zion H.V. Augensen, Alistair in Wonderland, Jacob Denumnut, Soruka, Sir Newtnut, Evie, Rambling Robin, Hashi, Black Ace 202, Dissy, Magenta, Hubbo Himbro Mirror, Russell, Vulgar Beast, Person 212, Claire Miboon, Oakwood Tree, Mr. Pyramid, Makot 02, Nils Schlatter, Iron Camel, and Nah, I'm going to bed. Take care everyone, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye, happy hunting.